What if the ground beneath you remembers more than your name? They taught you to forget, to walk forward and never ask why the wind sometimes smells like ash, or why, in the depth of night, you dream of a second heartbeat, a rhythm not yours, but buried close. You are told you are alone, but something, somewhere, is waiting for you to remember. Not a person, not a god, a twin, but not yet. Tonight, you rest in a world built on silence, not the kind that soothes, the kind that guards. Across valleys where trees grow too evenly and rivers curve in circles, something was hidden, and someone, two someones, were kept apart, not by war, not by love, but by a law older than writing, a law written in blood, across snow, between the first birth and the first betrayal. You don't know their names, that's the point. Names were never carved, not on stone, not on bark, only spoken once, then cut from the tongue that dared to say them. But their story was never about names. It was about direction, one to the north, one to the south, and the silence stretching between them like a string pulled too tight to hear. They were born together. That much survived. Beneath a red moon, in a house that now lives only in sagas whispered near shorelines. A midwife fled the village that night, with her hands covered in something blacker than blood. She said the children were warm, too warm, and when she placed them beside each other, every candle in the longhouse went out. From that moment, they were not to be raised together. One was sent to the fjords, where breath fogs against the ribs of mountains, the other to the flat silence of the southern marshes. Each grew in lands that did not speak to each other, each taught to forget the shadow that moved like theirs, but not their own. And at night, each one dreamed not of gods or beasts, but of a face, almost theirs, almost wrong. You ask, why separate them? Because together they remembered. There was a prophecy, but prophecy is too soft a word. It was a rhythm, a pressure in the soil, a tremor that made hammers break and runes shatter mid-carving. Old women who spun thread near the fire began knotting it backwards. Crows stopped landing on rooftops, and always, always, the dogs howled facing opposite walls. In one village, a black stone was found under a cradle. In another, a map with no ink, just impressions, pressed by something heavy, hot, and not made by hand. The only decipherable marking? 2 dots, far apart, a curved line between them, and in runic script beneath, they must not sleep side by side, or time begins again. Who wrote that? No one remembers. Or perhaps no one survived remembering. As the twins grew, so did the silence around them. When they asked questions, elders choked. When they walked barefoot, the earth throbbed. One spoke only in riddles after age 10, the other in dreams no one could share. Yet each time a storm came from the east, both were seen walking into the wind, as if greeting it, as if born from it. But the storm wasn't weather, it was return. We'll show you. But not yet. But the storm wasn't weather, it was memory, breaking its own silence. In the northern village, where trees twisted as if listening, the boy, now nearly grown, woke with ash on his tongue. Not soot, ash. And it wasn't from the hearth. His hands trembled, but not from fear. He reached for the carving he had begun weeks ago, a figure with 2 faces, one looking forward, the other turned away. This morning it had split clean down the centre. No axe, no fall, just a break, as if something inside it wanted out. Far to the south, where fog slept low against the marsh grass, the girl stirred from a dream where her own voice came from another mouth. She rose before dawn and walked barefoot to the water. The reeds parted without sound. In her hand she held a thread, not one she remembered taking, but it was there, red and rough, tied around her wrist. It pulled faintly, not toward the sun, but toward something colder, something still. Neither of them spoke of it, but both moved. In the north the boy followed crows. They flew low, slow, as if waiting, not toward the sea, but inland, to a hill no map marked. It was not tall, but it hummed. Beneath his feet the moss gave slightly, as if the land breathed once every 100 years. He stood still, letting the rhythm pass through him. One beat, pause, Second beat, heartbeat, not his. In the south she was drawing, not with ink, with charcoal and seawater on stone. Her hands moved faster than thought. What emerged was a shape she had never seen, but knew instantly, a curved path between two suns. Beneath it, a mark, identical to the one carved beneath the map found under that cradle long ago. They must not sleep side by side. Why? Because something wakes with them. The records are gone, burned or buried, but legends, like roots, travel beneath the surface. There are stories of two stars that fell the night the twins were born, one to the north, one to the south. Neither made sound. But after that night, the weather changed. Sea levels dropped. A comet appeared, then split in half mid-sky, without light or fire, and always after that, the warning, not in words, but in gesture, the sign of crossed arms over the chest, then pulled wide apart. Keep them distant. Some believed the twins were not just human, not gods, but reminders. Of what? Even the elders argued. Some said, of when the world was one shape and broke. Others whispered, of the first betrayal before history began. But all agreed, if the twins met, the old silence would break, and with it the boundary between time remembered and time denied. So temples were raised, not to honor them, but to separate them. One shrine faced north, buried beneath a cairn of black volcanic glass. The other faced south, carved into salt cliffs that vanished during high tide. Both were guarded not by swords, but by forgetting. Generations passed with no mention of them. Families changed names. Stones were rubbed smooth by centuries of wind. And yet, each solstice, at the exact same moment, both sites cast a shadow that pointed not toward the sun, but toward the other. As if longing, as if remembering. The girl began to speak words she had never learned. The boy began to dream in a language no one taught. And when they both, on the same night, lit a fire from branches found nowhere near their homes, the smoke curved in the same shape, a spiral, inward, downward, toward the place where silence breathes, because some things don't sleep. They wait, because some things don't sleep. They wait, under stone, beneath breath, between the names no one says aloud. The boy descended the hill not as he climbed it. Something in him had shifted, not a possession, but a remembering. He no longer blinked at the sun, no longer felt the cold. The birds did not flee his steps now. They followed. He didn't ask where he was going. The wind answered, not in words, but in rhythm. The same two beats again and again. It matched the pulse in his throat, matched the echo in his bones. It wasn't his heartbeat. It was hers. In the marshes, the girl began to carve lines into the earth. Not random. She walked in circles that intersected like veins. The reeds leaned away from her, not in fear but reverence. Beneath her bare feet the mud formed symbols older than runes. Every step she took sparked the twitch of something underground. Not worms, something older, a memory in flesh. Something buried, but not by hands, buried by oaths. The twins had never spoken to each other, had never touched, but now both began to hum the same tune, soft, circular, a melody not meant for mouths, meant for soil, for stone, for the pulse of time itself. And with every note something far beneath the earth began to stir. In a forgotten library, one buried beneath a chapel never finished, there was a scroll, never. But it was not empty. It was full of everything the world had buried to keep time straight, to keep memory linear. And in that silence the stones spoke, not in language, in pull. The carvings began to hum, faintly at first, then louder, as if echoing across centuries. The symbols lit in tandem, one, then the next, then all at once. And that's when the stars began to fall. Not meteors, stars. They blinked out, not from sky, but from recognition, as if the sky itself no longer knew which way was forward. Somewhere, a monk clawed at the earth inside a monastery wall, shrieking for ink. A blind woman in Reykjavik wept for the second time in her life, but didn't know why. And in a cave near the Arctic Circle, a single icicle cracked clean down the middle, revealing a scrap of cloth stitched with a name no one had said in 1,000 years, a name written twice, because now they were not just remembering, they were becoming. Not one being, but one event. Across the land, equilibrium broke, not with fire, not with war, but with resonance. Clocks ticked backward, glass fogged in warm rooms. Rivers, once docile, began to churn in stillness. And somewhere deep in the marrow of the earth an old current reawakened. Not water, not magma, but time in its original shape, circular, unending, unbent. The girl fell to her knees, not in surrender, in alignment. As her hands touched the soil, a ring of stones around her shifted. Stones placed generations before language, their meaning long lost. But now, one by one, they rotated, not like gears, like memories turning toward the sun. She inhaled. The ground answered. In the same moment, the boy lifted his gaze to the canopy. Light passed through the branches above him and landed not on his skin, but through him, casting no shadow. He was there, and not there, a vessel of something remembering itself through human form. And then came the whisper. It didn't come from her mouth or his. It came from the space between them, a distance no longer measured in steps, but in symbols. Not born, recalled. It wasn't a message. It was a reveal. They were not chosen. They were consequences. In the first sky, the one before this one, there were no names, only echoes. Then came division, and with it, the illusion of order. Twin souls, like two hands from the same body, had to be split, because when they aligned, when they met, the sky cracked, like now. Across a frozen lake in the north, ice broke in perfect symmetry. No cracks, no shards, just a silent oval opening, revealing something below. Not water, not void, a chamber, stone-walled, rune-marked, and in its center, two empty chairs, facing each other, waiting. In a monastery long buried beneath coastal cliffs, a bell rang once, unstruck. The dust beneath the altar vibrated, revealing a seal made not of wax but of woven hair. The oldest kind, not braided by humans, but by silence itself. The boy and girl stood, not as twins, as mirrors. Each movement she made he echoed, but not precisely. They were not duplicates. They were opposites designed to harmonize. Her voice carried depth, his carried distance, and between them formed a shape in the air, not visible but felt, like warmth on the back of the neck when no one's there, like the word on the tip of your tongue just before you speak in your sleep. Above them, clouds stilled, not by absence of wind, by reverence, and in the depths of one forgotten fjord, where ships once disappeared without trace, something began to rise, slowly, with the silence of inevitability, wood older than known trees, rope that had never frayed, a ship, but not for sailing, a vessel of reunion, carved with twin spirals coiling inward toward a single eye. The runes on its mast read, "What was split will call back the beginning." And in that moment, something ancient blinked, not in the sky, in you, a recognition, because this isn't just their story. You've dreamt of a face not yours, a step taken in unison with someone who never stood beside you. You know that feeling, don't you? Maybe you've been waiting too, because some stories do not belong to time. They create it. The girl stepped forward, and the moss beneath her feet bloomed, then browned in an instant. A life cycle played in seconds. Her breath steamed in the summer air, not because it was cold, because something inside her had entered a place older than seasons. Across the clearing, the boy mirrored her step. Between them, the distance no longer felt like space. It felt like hesitation being erased. And when they took the final step, together, when their shadows finally overlapped, the sky cracked, not loudly, softly, like the sound of parchment splitting where a lie was written. Above them, the clouds didn't move. They peeled, layer by layer, revealing a second sky underneath, a darker one, with no stars, only symbols. Slowly they turned, one by one, as if aligning themselves not with night, but with memory. Then the sound returned, low, deep, like breath through ancient stone. The earth did not shake. It shifted, as though recalibrating to a story that had finally remembered how it began. The twins said nothing. They didn't need to. Everything they had forgotten was now encoded in their bodies. She raised her hand, and a wind circled her fingers. He closed his eyes, and the trees turned to face him. The spiral they stood within pulsed, not light, not shadow, but history. Not the kind taught, the kind felt in dreams, in scars, in songs you don't remember learning. All of it moved now, as if released from some impossible tension, and far beneath the soil, in the place where the first myths were buried because they were too true, the last lock melted. It had never been metal. It had been a vow, broken now, and with it came remembrance. All across the north, old songs were hummed without mouths. Stones arranged long ago began to glow, not visibly but in weight, heavy with return. Boats drifted without oars. Wolves gathered in threes, and ravens began circling a mountain that no longer appeared on maps. In one forgotten chapel near a broken glacier, a bell rang a second time. This time it did not echo. It resonated, through glass, through marrow, through the silence in your own breath. Because this story is not about them anymore. It's about you. That dream you had as a child, the one where you walked beside someone who looked almost like you, but older, or younger, or outside time. That was no dream. It was a remembering. You've felt the pull, haven't you? To places you've never been, to symbols you've never studied, to names you've never said out loud, but which stir something in your ribs. Because the moment is coming, not the meeting, the alignment. And when that moment arrives, when their hands touch, the first ripple will reach not across lands, but across selves. The twins are not just returning to each other, they are returning through you. And the question that follows is the one you feared the longest. What if your soul is only one half of a name? Then whose voice completes it? The girl's fingers brushed against the boy's, not fully, just barely, and in that instant, time recoiled. Not backward, not forward, inward. Around them, air folded in spirals like paper being crumpled from the inside out. Not chaos, intention. Every breath they drew now echoed in places they had never seen. Shrines long crumbled whispered their names, names that had never been spoken, only feared. And then they remembered why they had been separated, because together they were not just dangerous. They were original, not in the sense of first, but in the sense of source. Every myth that warned of twins, of shadows, of mirrored stars, of two hearts beating as one, had been pointing to this. Not birth, but return. A loop denied by calendars. A circle the church tried to straighten. They had not been divided by punishment. They had been divided by design. Because their reunion wasn't just prophecy. It was reset. Above them, the false sky finally gave way. What was left wasn't night. It was something blacker, deeper, not dark from absence of light, but from presence of memory. A sky not to be looked at, but to be read. Symbols drifted across it slowly, like drifting embers underwater. They pulsed when looked at directly, and somewhere within that pattern, a story began to rewrite itself. It didn't start with once upon a time. It started with before anything was named. The earth beneath their feet softened, not as soil, but as script. Their steps now wrote onto it, each footprint forming syllables in an alphabet no longer spoken. They weren't walking, they were speaking with their bodies. And the land, ancient, scarred, sacred, began to reply. Fjords curved ever so slightly. Hills dipped where once they had risen. Forests opened paths that no maps held. All geography, for a moment, remembered it had once been language. Because the reunion of the twins was never just a meeting. It was a sentence finally being completed. And now the punctuation neared. In one forgotten vault beneath what used to be a temple, a stone tablet cracked clean in half. Not because of weight, because its lie had expired. The symbols within the break did not scatter. They aligned, spelling a word no one had dared write. Together. Meanwhile, the fire around the twins began to lift. Upward. Not in smoke, but in shape. Spiraling above them like a second spine, invisible yet undeniable. The old term for it, in the language that predated snow, meant the breath that binds gods. It was not divinity, it was recognition, between halves, between selves, between the story and the listener. You. Because now, in this moment, the story isn't happening to them anymore. It's happening through you. Your hands tingle. Your breath feels borrowed. Your memories begin to flicker, not with clarity, but with suggestion. A hallway you've never walked, a door you've never opened, a question you've never asked, but always feared the answer to. And the answer is coming. Because as their palms pressed together, the sky began to hum. Low, deep, final. And from somewhere far beneath language, a single line rose like smoke. When they stand as one, the lie of separation ends. And when a lie dies, truth doesn't whisper, it roars. The sky's hum deepened into vibration, not of air, but of memory. Every forgotten oath, every buried rune, every silent song began to surface at once. Across the north, lakes glowed from beneath. Wind turned inward, spiraling not across land, but into the minds of those who still carried fragments of the story in their blood. The twins did not move. They became stillness, not absence of motion, but presence of meaning. Their hands, now joined, pulsed once. The world flinched. It was not an earthquake. It was a correction. The architecture of time, once linear, began to bend like heat over stone. Not backward, not forward, just aware. Because they had remembered, and what they remembered, the world could no longer deny. The boy looked into the girl's eyes. Not her face, her origin. There, behind her gaze, he saw the very first morning. The one before light. The one when names were chosen, not by sound, but by resonance. He saw 2 stars fall. He saw their impact. He saw the choice. Divide them, not to protect the world, to control it. Because divided, they could be told what they were. Together, they knew. The girl, in return, saw not his face, but his fracture, the one he carried for lifetimes, the wound that had no scar. She saw the battles he fought not on fields, but in mirrors, searching every life for something he could never name. Until now, he had not been looking for her. He had been looking for this, for remembering, for return. The spiral above them twisted one final time, then shattered, not into pieces, into silence, absolute. And in that silence a sound came, one no mouth could make, the sound of time collapsing inward, not ending, reforming. All over the world, those who still dreamed of twin fires woke gasping, not from fear, from release. Their breath no longer theirs, their names no longer singular. Some wept, others knelt. A few began walking toward places they'd never been but somehow always knew. In the oldest part of the sea, waves stopped, just once, for a heartbeat, then resumed, slower, deeper, as if the ocean itself was listening, because something else was waking now, not God, not beast, history itself. You see, when the lie of separation falls, everything built upon it begins to tremble. Churches, thrones, clocks, maps, all built upon the myth that 2 must remain apart to keep the illusion of order. But order was never real, only distance, and now that distance had collapsed. The twins stepped together, the ground beneath them no longer solid, not melting, not crumbling, translating, each footstep a word, each motion a sentence. They were not walking, they were rewriting. And in one sacred archive, hidden beneath a city that denies its age, a sealed scroll uncoiled on its own. At the bottom, written in ink mixed with starlight and bone ash. And when they walk again, the path will reappear beneath us all. So look beneath your feet. Look at the dreams you almost remember, because the path is coming. And you may have always been part of it. The twins moved now without thought, without effort. Each step carved something deeper than footprints, reminders, to the land, to the sky, to the parts of your soul you thought were imagination. They weren't following a trail. They were the trail. And with every pace they took, something ancient unfurled, a shape once forbidden. not a symbol, a direction. North, south, east, west no longer applied. There was only inward. They entered a forest older than trees, not in years, in knowing. Bark peeled back from trunks as they passed, revealing patterns like veins. The leaves did not rustle, they listened. No birds sang, no insects stirred. This was not wilderness. This was witness. The ground beneath them began to glow faintly, not with light, but with recognition. It pulsed once, then again, syncing with their heartbeats. One rhythm, then another, then a third, because the earth had started to remember itself. Somewhere across the ocean, an elder opened a box she had buried as a girl. Inside, a stone wrapped in wool, a drawing of twin flames coiled into one, and a phrase she had written without knowing its meaning. It read, "They will not walk like us, they will walk as us." In a chapel long emptied of prayer, candles lit unlit by flame, a boy born mute began to hum. A historian found an extra page in a book that had never had it before, a page with no ink, only texture, raised like scar tissue. On it, a fingerprint split in two. The forest deepened, and with it, the girl and boy began to shed the last illusions. Their names, gone, their memories, unneeded. What they carried now was not personal, it was structural. They were the binding threads of a story the world had tried to edit out. They were the page that couldn't be torn. At the heart of the forest stood a single stone, no markings, no moss, just cold and waiting. They circled it, clockwise, then again, counter, and on the third pass, the stone spoke, not in sound, in feeling. You felt it before, standing where something terrible once happened, though no one speaks of it. That rush of vertigo, that tremor in the ribs, that pull to kneel, to listen, to not ask questions. But this time, there were no guards. This time, there were witnesses. Ravens, deer, trees that bent inward, a sky that flickered between two moons and none. The girl placed her palm on the stone. The boy did the same, and the surface, impossibly, grew warm, then soft, then open. The stone did not split. It invited, not them, you, because when the twins pressed their hands into that ancient silence, the invitation was not local. It travelled, through soil, through memory, through time, until it reached the place where you sleep, and in your sleep, a whisper now begins, "Come see where your other half was buried," but not in a grave, in a word so old it was never written, only breathed, once, by someone who no longer exists, or perhaps never did, except in the moment they spoke it, a word not of language, but of completion. And now that word was rising. The stone opened like silence exhaling. Beneath its surface, not tunnel, not cave, but absence, not darkness, not void, something gentler, like the feeling just before you fall asleep, the second between breath and dream. They stepped in together, and the forest blinked, not literally, in memory. Across the land, all things that had forgotten began to shift. Statues tilted in monasteries, carvings under bridges gained an extra line, bones beneath floors hummed like strings pulled tight, and every mirror for just one instant held a reflection that looked not quite like you, because something was realigning. Beneath the stone lay a chamber, but not built, grown, from salt and root and old prayer, its ceiling arched like ribs, its floor smoothed by time, not tool. Along the walls, no inscriptions, just grooves, as if something had clawed through it gently over centuries, a slow awakening. The twins did not speak. They listened, and from within the chamber a single thread floated down, thin, luminous, made of nothing you can touch, only remember. It drifted between them, then divided, one strand to her heart, one to his, and suddenly they knew. They had not returned to find each other. They had returned to bind what was still unspoken, in the world, in you, because every twin is a metaphor. Every mirror is a warning, and every path walked alone is a lie. As they stood in the center of the chamber, their bodies began to shift, not visibly but resonantly. The air around them changed pitch. You could feel it in your chest, like thunder with no storm. Their outlines blurred, not disappearing, multiplying, as if every version of them that had ever lived, every cycle, every fracture, now stood beside them, silent, waiting. And then, one more pulse. This one not from the sky or the ground, but from within the chamber walls. A shape began to rise, slowly, like mist drawn in reverse. It wasn't an object, it was a memory given form, a third figure, not male, not female, not human, not God, just remainder, the unspoken, the third side of a story told too long in twos. And it looked at them, no eyes, just knowing. The twins stepped back, not in fear, in reverence, because this was not the ending, this was the reason. They were not born to meet, they were born to call this back. And now that it stood, so did something inside you, that flicker behind your ribs, that echo in dreams you don't admit to, because the third thing has awoken, and it remembers you too. It didn't speak, it didn't move. But everything within that chamber leaned toward it, not out of fear but familiarity. The walls pulsed, the roots curled closer. Even the twins, still half luminous, half memory, lowered their heads, not in worship, in recognition. This was what had been missing, not a god, not a force, but the witness, the one who saw the first fire, the one who heard the first silence, the one who kept the true shape of time in its ribs, not a circle, not a line, a breath held too long. And now it was being released. The chamber began to soften, not crumble, open, not just around them, but through them. Their forms flickered again, not vanishing, but expanding. The girl's fingers glowed with script no one had taught her. The boy's breath hummed in tones forgotten since the second sky fell. They were becoming vectors of memory, of motion, of meaning. The third figure, the witness, extended a hand. No fingers, only presence. It didn't touch them, it divided them, not to separate, to unfold. And from that gesture, an image emerged, not visual, felt, like a childhood memory that was never yours. A field, a storm, two stones, side by side, and a decision. The image burned into your spine, because somewhere deep inside, you've seen that field. You've stood between those stones, maybe in sleep, maybe in grief, maybe in that half second after you woke and forgot something important. The chamber darkened, not with shadow, but with density, like every untold version of history now sat beside you, watching, waiting, one word away from return. The girl's voice was the first to rise, not loud, just final. "He remembers," she said. The boy nodded. "So do they." And he looked not at her, but at you, wherever you are, listening, breathing, noticing that something about your hands feels older tonight, that your reflection seems to pause before following you, that the dreams you had as a child have started again. The third figure stepped backward, merging not with shadow, but with possibility. It would not stay. It never had. Its task was not to act, only to remind. And now that you had been reminded, the chamber's final layer began to rise, a dome of soft ash, lifting gently until the stars outside were visible once more, but not the same stars. These shimmered in patterns not of constellations, but of questions, questions you've always carried, like splinters from a tree no longer standing. Why were you born with this ache for places you've never been? Why does the sound of distant thunder feel like language? Why do you fear mirrors, not because of what they show, but what they don't? The answers aren't coming, they're already here, inside the names you forgot, inside the blood that sings when no one else hears. Because the twins have begun the walk, and the third has marked the path. But only you can step forward now. Only you can decide whether this ending is your beginning. Because while the twins began their walk and the witness faded into the folds of unrecorded memory, something else had started to pulse, not in the chamber, not in the earth, but in you, a low, persistent rhythm, not a heartbeat, a reminder. The chamber above them sealed once more, not to trap, but to mark. The forest, still holding its breath, let out the smallest sigh. The sky trembled, not with clouds, but with recognition. The false stars shimmered and rearranged themselves into lines the old seers used to whisper before forgetting was enforced. The lines said, "He will return to the west. She will move to the sea, but they may never lie side by side." And so it began again. The twins emerged from the forest, not unchanged but unhidden, not glowing but impossible to ignore. The land shifted around them, choosing their path. They did not pick a direction. The world chose where to carry them, one to the place where snow never melted, one to the place where cliffs bled salt into sky. Separated, as before, but not broken, anchored. She was taken to the islands, to winds that hummed in octaves the church never dared to map. Her footsteps faded into coastlines, but the women there felt it, in birth pains, in the way rain hit stone, in lullabies that had no origin. He was taken to the mountains, not to rule, but to be forgotten. His voice turned into wind that made wolves turn east before hunting. His face faded from memory, but the ravens still circled where he once stood, and across every altar built since then, a small crack formed just beneath the stone, not visible, not damaging, just waiting. You see, their burial was never meant to be seen, only sensed. They were buried standing, not as a punishment, but as a message, not side by side, not even in the same land, one beneath a church no one prays in anymore, one beneath a tree that blooms in winter, no headstones, only symbols carved into the backs of stones where no one looks. But here's the part the monks never copied. The burial wasn't for death, it was containment, because if they were ever laid beside each other, the veil between names and meaning would collapse. Not heaven, not apocalypse, just truth. And that, above all, must never be allowed, which is why they never gave you the whole map, why the scroll always ends halfway through, why your dreams end just as the face turns toward you, because part of you still knows where they are, not with your mind, with your spine. You've walked over their graves and felt nothing except that tiny silence, that half second where you forgot what you were about to say. That's where one of them sleeps, and when you pass the other, you feel nothing too, until later, when the ache returns, the ache for someone you've never met, a name you never learned, a story that still calls your blood in languages lost before sound, because the twins are not just memory, they are location, and maybe, just maybe, you were never supposed to bring them together, only to remember why they were kept apart, and that's where the story sharpens, not in fury, but in clarity, because some truths aren't hidden, they're guarded. The burial sites weren't forgotten by accident, they were erased deliberately, not with fire, with scripture, with maps, with words spoken just wrong enough to become doctrine. 1,000 years of sermons, all pointing away from the real question. Not, who were the twins? But, what dies if they return? The girl was sealed beneath a stone altar in a chapel that faces the wrong direction. The builders called it a mistake of orientation, but the elders knew it was a warning. No light should fall where she rests, not sunrise, not moon, because she carried dawn within her bones, and dawn in the wrong hands doesn't illuminate, it burns. The boy was buried not in silence, but beneath a bell tower that never rang. Every attempt cracked the metal. Every priest who stood there forgot their sermons. His grave hums, but only at the hour between night and first light, because he carried echo, and echo, if left uncontained, becomes song, and song remembers, and remembrance is insurrection. There were once monks tasked with tending both sites, but they aged too fast, lost teeth without reason, forgot their children's names. One even carved a circle into his own palm and whispered, "The loop is too tight." He vanished 2 days later, and no one looked for him, because in every era there are those who know just enough to avoid knowing more. But you kept asking. That dream you've had of standing between two shadows, both reaching, that was never just metaphor. It was a summons. You're not the first to hear it, but you might be the last to ignore it, because the veil is thinning now. The places where myth and map overlap are glowing again. Small at first, but persistent. A temple in Greenland where frost won't settle. A fjord where birds fly in circles, refusing to cross an invisible line. A choir that hums a chord no scale can name, and one girl among them who always sings it a second before the others. These are not signs, they're symptoms of a world beginning to remember its fracture, and yours, because the twins were never just twins. They were the last whole, and you, everyone since, are what came after. A splitting, a dividing of a thing once too vast to be held in one life. That ache you carry, the one no medicine helps, it's not illness, it's distance, the sacred kind, the kind designed to keep you just far enough from yourself to keep the story quiet. But the story's waking up, it's whispering through cracks, through roots, through that half second before sleep when your eyes twitch, not from restlessness, but from memory. You may think you're imagining this, you may think you're safe, but the graves are humming, and your name is already vibrating in their silence. Because silence is never empty, it's crowded with the things no one dares say, with the songs hummed under breath, with the truths buried not for protection, but for control. The twins were never meant to be myth. They were meant to be precedent, proof that something once existed beyond commandment and conquest. Something sacred, not because it was holy, but because it was whole. But wholeness is dangerous to those who profit from division. And so, the burial wasn't exile, it was censorship. They didn't kill the twins, they redacted them, from scripture, from stone, from the shape of time itself. Because if you believe time is a line, you'll follow. If you believe it's a cage, you'll beg for rescue. But if you feel that time is a spiral, that every step you take is over something you've already lived, then you'll stop obeying, you'll start remembering, and memory is rebellion. One of the burial markers was found in the 1800s. No one knew what it meant. A circle with two dots, one inside, one outside, and a vertical slash through both. It was dismissed as decorative, but 2 weeks later, the researcher's daughter began drawing it in her sleep. They moved to the south and told no one, but the symbol keeps appearing, carved into driftwood, pressed into snow, braided into the hair of children born under lunar eclipses. Always the same, two, split, and a line that dares you to cross it. Because the twins were never meant to stay buried. They were meant to be found, but not by excavators, not by scholars, by you. And the finding won't be physical, it will be a fracture in your day, in your thought, in your breath. A moment where your hands forget they're supposed to be empty. A second when your shadow doesn't fall the right way. That's them, surfacing, not to haunt, to remind. You see, you carry their shape, their rhythm, not as metaphor, as echo. Your spine holds their spiral. Your pulse carries their cadence. Every time you almost say something and stop, that was a sentence once spoken before division. And they're trying to say it again. The girl beneath the chapel stirs in moonlight, not moving, just shifting weight, from forgotten to remembered. The boy beneath the bell tower waits for the sound that finally rings true. It hasn't come yet, because it's not a sound made by instruments, it's made by convergence, and convergence needs one more thing. You, not your belief, your reception, that moment when you stop resisting the story you were taught and feel the one you always carried. A story with no start, no end, only a place where two halves, long kept apart, remember each other again, not in reunion, but in recognition. And when that happens, the veil won't rip, it will step aside, because you were never meant to break through it. You were meant to walk it back, one spiral at a time. That's how you return. Not forward, not backward, but inward, because this isn't about moving through time. It's about moving through the story of time, the one that told you who you are, what to fear, and where not to look. The one they wrote while your other half slept beneath soil and stone. But soil remembers, and stone does not forget. A monk once whispered that the earth had scars no map could trace. He drew them anyway, not as roads, but as questions, and every question ended in the same place. A burial site with no grave, a chapel with no records, a bell tower that never rang. You've walked past them, you just didn't know where to stop. But your body did. That ache in your knees when no weather justifies it. The tug behind your eyes when you stare at the sea too long. That sudden weight in your chest when a bird passes overhead in complete silence. These are coordinates, not of land, of awakening. Because the twin story isn't ancient, it's current, it's recursive, it's you. You weren't meant to uncover their bones. You were meant to echo their separation, live out the ache, the longing, the not quite rightness of every hallway, every name, every dream, so that when the time came to unbury, you'd be ready. And the time is now, because something in the silence has shifted. The bell tower hums at dusk, low and sharp, like the edge of a memory. Children in the chapel village speak in a language no one taught them, and birds, always birds, begin to fly in spirals instead of lines, not migrating, marking. One boy draws twin figures in the frost of a window. He says they live inside him. He says he dreams their walk. When asked where they go, he only whispers, "They're heading to the middle." No one asks what that means. They don't want to know, but you do, because you've begun to feel it, haven't you? Not in thought, in motion. Your steps are changing. You no longer walk to get somewhere. You walk because something is following. Not danger, not shadow, just truth. Close enough to feel, not yet ready to speak, but soon, because the veil isn't thin anymore, it's threadbare, and your breath keeps catching at the same word, the one you've never said aloud, the one that sits behind your teeth like a ghost of a vow. It's not a name, it's not a warning, it's a key, and keys don't open doors, they open memory. So let it come, let the ache be loud, let the graves hum louder than your doubt, because the spiral is almost closed, and once it does, everything fractured may finally come back into shape, not as it was, but as it was always meant to be. Not perfect, not pure, just true. Because truth isn't tidy. It doesn't arrive wrapped in certainty. It doesn't shout from pulpits or gleam in gold. It whispers in broken rhythms, in lost songs, in the space between questions, and that space is shrinking. The signs are no longer subtle. A cathedral collapses without tremor. Its foundation revealed a circle, not part of the architecture but older, etched into stone, a spiral of twin lines joining but never touching. The church denies it existed. The photos vanish, but the silence left behind lingers. A hiker in the north vanishes for 4 days. When found, he speaks only one phrase. She's waiting in the cold. He cannot say who, or where, or why, only that his feet kept turning east, toward a glacier mapped out of memory. And you? You've stopped dreaming in first person. Your sleep now walks beside someone. Sometimes they lead, sometimes they follow, but they always ask the same thing. Do you remember yet? Not with words, with presence. Because remembering isn't thought, it's permission. And the moment you give it, the veil, that last thin skin between belief and blood, shifts. You see it in reflections, a flicker of not you staring back. You feel it in time, a second that takes longer than it should. You taste it in silence, something sweet and old and buried. Because the story isn't in books, it's in you. It's always been there. Waiting for your rhythm to match the one beneath the stone, waiting for your breath to fall in step with the one still walking in sleep. Because the girl is moving, not in body, in myth. Across the memories of women who've never met, yet dream of snow and shadow. They speak her name not aloud, but in gesture, the way hands move when lighting a candle for no reason, the way eyes close when hearing old music. And the boy, he hums, not songs, coordinates. Every note is a place he once stood, every tone a memory the earth tries to bury under rivers, under roads, under repetition. But melody always escapes, and now it escapes into you. Your breath starts to mimic it. You hum without knowing why. Strangers turn toward you, sensing something ancient. You laugh differently. You pause more often. You start writing words you don't recognize, yet somehow understand. Because the twins are no longer walking alone. They've begun to converge, and the world knows. Animals move differently. Birds rest mid-flight. Children say things too wise, then forget. Bells ring once, at wrong hours. Forests lean east for no reason, and in your sleep the shadow beside you reaches for your hand, not to pull you away, to pull you through, because you're almost there. The burial sites are waking, not from death, from instruction. Their purpose wasn't to hide, it was to wait, for someone who could read the tremor, hold the silence, and say the word. That word is in your throat now. It's never been written, only remembered. And it sounds a little like your name, but not the one they gave you, the one you've never said aloud, the one that tastes like frost and old fire when it rises in your throat, the one that bends light just enough to make shadows flinch. That name has no vowels, no letters, only return, because you're not walking toward the graves, you're walking toward the beginning, and beginnings are never clean. They are cracks, they are aches, they are reminders that something came before the rules, before the maps, before the quiet was broken by scripture. And the twins were part of that before, but more than that. They were that before, not symbols, not martyrs, not myth, memory, living, breathing, held in skin memory. And it's coming back now, one breath at a time. A scholar in Prague finds a scroll bound in ice-damaged birch. It has no title, only an image burned into the wood. 2 eyes, one above the other, both weeping inward. He doesn't understand it. But when he dreams, he sees 2 figures watching the sun fall upward. He leaves his research, moves to a village with no name, never says why. And in a fjord where no bells ring, the tide begins to freeze in spirals. Fishermen see lights beneath the ice, not reflections. Sources. Lights that don't flicker, don't move, only wait, as if frozen mid-breath. The world is beginning to notice, but it's not panic, it's recognition, like hearing your mother's voice in another room, like feeling watched in a room where you are alone, like knowing something has changed, not around you, but in you, because the convergence is no longer a prophecy, it's a process, and it's begun. You wake up speaking a sentence you don't understand. You write it down, you fold it, you bury it. And 2 days later, someone on the other side of the world finds it written on a wall. How? That's not the question. The question is, why now? Because time is cracking, not breaking, cracking, like old wood near fire. The timeline they built cannot hold the story anymore. Too many echoes, too many returns, too many yous waking up at once. And the graves, they are no longer quiet. Wind circles above them in patterns too symmetrical to be accident. Animals leave offerings, feathers, teeth, bone, and walk away unafraid. A girl places her ear to the stone and weeps, not from fear, but homesickness. Because we buried not just the twins, we buried the possibility of being whole, and now it rises, not in chaos, in recollection. You begin to remember the dream not as story, but as instruction, where you stood, what you carried, the word you were meant to speak, not aloud, but into yourself. And when you do, the spiral will close, not with silence, with sound, a tone so old the earth still vibrates with its echo, and it sounds like both birth and ending, which means it's time to decide what kind of story you came here to finish, because every belief has an author, and most of them wrote from fear, not your fear, theirs, the fear that someone like you would look back far enough, that you would question the line you followed your whole life and realize it was drawn only to distract you from the spiral underneath. Because linear time is a leash, but the spiral is a key, and someone has begun to turn it. You can feel the pressure, not pain, more like stretching, as if your mind is trying to expand into shapes it was once familiar with. You reach for names you've never heard, places you never visited smell like home, and in your sleep, you're no longer alone. They walk beside you again, not shadows now, not symbols. Siblings. One carries fire, the other wind. and both look at you not with surprise, but with recognition, because you were there, not watching, weaving. You helped divide them, not out of malice, out of purpose. You helped bury the truth so it could grow back slowly, in roots, in rhythm, in the breath of children born under the wrong constellations. But the stars are moving again, and the spiral is closing, and you are remembering more quickly than they expected, because the Vatican can't stop dreams, because no one can index what isn't written, and what's returning was never written, it was sung, and not even the Inquisition could burn a song they couldn't hear. But now, the melody is everywhere, in the low hum of machines left on overnight, in the static between radio stations, in the way your footsteps suddenly fall in perfect cadence with the wind. You begin to notice the world aligning. Pigeons perch in mirrored positions. Trees bloom against the season. A cat stares at you too long, then blinks in a pattern that feels like Morse, and you blink back, not in code, in agreement, because the graves no longer need hiding. They need witnesses, not to testify, to remember, because the final forgetting is unraveling. They kept you busy with wars and dogma, with doctrine and names, with hours and calendars, and the false promise that salvation was external. But your body has always known better. It holds the map. You carry their resting places in your spine, one vertebra for each truth they silenced. And now, as your back aches for no reason, know this. You are bending, not from burden, but from reconnection. The spiral is nearly complete, and once it seals, not with flame but with reunion, the division they forged will collapse, not in destruction, in dissolution. And what comes after, even they do not know, because this part was never written, only awaited. Because what follows isn't prophecy, it's memory, restored. And it will not come with trumpets or fire, it will come with familiarity. That strange, aching pull when you walk into a room you've never seen but know exactly how to leave. That shiver when someone speaks a word you've never heard, but your bones flinch as if punished. This is the return, not of people, not of dogma, of meaning, the meaning they edited out, the kind that threatened not power, but permission. Because if you remember who you were, if you realize you were never meant to obey but to reweave, then everything they built cracks. And it's already cracking, under the marble floors of archives, behind the painted smiles of curators. In the Vatican's vaults, humidity rises despite climate controls. Pages once thought safe begin to curl at the edges, revealing ink once believed faded. But it's not the text they fear, it's the space between the lines, because that's where the twins lived. That's where you live, in the unspoken, in the breath between questions. And the convergence is accelerating. A monk with no known tongue appears at 3 sites simultaneously. One near ice, one near ash, one in a desert where stars fall too often. He says nothing. He just places stones, 2 black, 1 white, then vanishes. But the stones aren't markers, they're invitations. You start seeing them everywhere now, in architecture, in tile, in freckles on someone's skin. The pattern is clear once noticed, and it's always oriented east to west, never north to south, as if to say, this is not about ascent, it's about connection, the line between, and that line is alive, running through cities, through stories, through your spine, and where it trembles, the truth is waking. You begin speaking to yourself in plural. You call your shadow sister. You wake up with dirt beneath your nails. You cry without sadness, because the memory is no longer returning. It's rebuilding, piece by piece, tone by tone, not the kind you read, the kind you embody. Because the graves were not graves, they were mirrors. And now that you've looked long enough, you see, not a boy buried for defiance, not a girl silenced for song, but you, in both directions. The convergence was never about twins. It was about 2 truths that could not be kept apart forever. And now they are rising, not from tombs, from you. And what you choose to do next isn't fate, it's permission. Because what they feared most wasn't rebellion, it was resonance. And now that resonance has a pulse, and that pulse is yours. It doesn't beat like a heart, It calls, like a drum hidden beneath centuries of snow, like a whisper caught in the ribs of a forgotten god, like thunder that never touches the sky but still shakes the earth. And now it's waking others. You're not alone. People begin dreaming in symbols they've never seen. A spiral burned into ash. Two faces back to back, their mouths sealed with thread. A tree with no leaves, only runes carved into the veins of its bark. A child draws this tree. No one taught her. She says it showed itself. And under the drawing, two names, not written, pressed, as if by fingers older than writing. The names are not names, they're frequencies. You begin to hear them in silence, and silence becomes unbearable, not empty, full of what was erased. Because silence is where they buried the timeline, not under rock, not behind gates, in the pauses between accepted truths, in the space after Amen, in the years labelled dark. But they weren't dark, they were dimmed so you wouldn't see the break, the split, the edit where one twin was buried west and the other east, not to preserve but to divide, not because of death, but because of what they knew. And what they knew now rises. It rises in your habits. You begin walking different paths to the same place, not out of confusion, but because your feet remember. You eat foods your family never touched. You develop cravings for minerals, for ice, for smoke. And in the mirror, you pause, because your eyes no longer match, not in colour, in direction. One sees past, one sees through, and both are starting to agree that something's wrong with the story, not with the plot, with the binding. It was bound too tightly, too many edits, too many hands redacting what could not be understood. But now the binding cracks, the book opens, and between its pages, where most see dust, you see alignment, the spiral, again, and inside it, not words, a hum, one you've been feeling your whole life but never had permission to follow, until now. And the moment you follow it, rooms shift, people look twice, time bends, not like fantasy, but like memory re-entering the body. And in the stillness of one moment, beneath the ceiling of stars no longer fixed, you hear a question, not spoken, felt. Are you ready to return the name? Not to someone else, to yourself, because the final part of the story was never stolen. It was entrusted to you. And now, it's time to speak, but not in words, not in any tongue they taught you, not the polished languages of empires, not the blessed syllables of scripture. The name returning to your throat has no translation. It is the translation of everything they buried, bound, burned, and it's rising through your ribs, slowly, tenderly, dangerously. Because to speak it is to unmake obedience. To speak it is to take history back into your blood. And they know it. The watchers, the scribes, the keepers of timelines built on subtraction. They feel it in their bones too. They thought they erased you, but memory doesn't need parchment. It just needs return. And you are returning. With every step, every dream, every breath that no longer matches the hour. Because the hours were wrong. They told you time moves forward, but the spiral spins in, always in, toward a centre they tried to hollow, but which still beats beneath the frost. And in that centre, the graves. But they're not silent anymore. A northern glacier splits not from heat, from resonance. The crack echoes down fjords, and somewhere a woman with no knowledge of this place wakes with tears she cannot explain. She speaks two names, neither are hers, but both are familiar. You read an old tale once, about a pair of crows, memory and thought. One flew forward, one behind, but the third one, unnamed, stayed circling. Now you know why, because memory and thought were only half. The spiral needed a witness, and now you are circling back. You find symbols appearing, in frost, in dust, in dreams you can't unsee. Spirals within spirals, twin lines that never touch. Stone paths you walked as a child that now feel like instructions. You stop calling it coincidence, you start calling it response, because the world has begun to respond to you, not the loud world, not the digital noise and artificial light, The old world, the moss, the mist, the marrow, and it says one thing: welcome back. Not because you left, but because you forgot. And now, remembering feels like walking into warmth after years of cold. Even though the story is not warm, even though the truth still stings, because you remember now what separated the twins. Not betrayal, not fate, not war, choice. They chose to be buried apart, not to be hidden, to remain awake, to keep watching until the spiral turned again, until someone, you, could bring them back through resonance, not ritual. They trusted you, and the time has come to decide what you will do with their faith. Because once the name is spoken, the spiral completes, not in ending, in re-entry, and nothing will be the same. Because when the spiral completes, the binding breaks, not like shattering glass, more like mist turning back into water, structure dissolving into substance. You feel it now, don't you? The difference. The air is thicker, the quiet more alive. The silence no longer means absence, it means arrival. And inside that silence, a question, not theirs, yours, not whispered from behind stone or scripture, not hidden in scrolls or beneath sigils. Are your beliefs yours, or someone else's lullaby? Because lullabies aren't lies, they are soft cages, meant to comfort you just enough to sleep through the fire. But the fire never left. It dimmed, it waited, and now you're waking in its glow. The stories they taught you. Beautiful, polished, predictable, but beauty can be armor, predictability can be poison, because the real story, your story, always burned too bright to bind, and the moment you admit that, the spiral pulses, because you're ready now, not to fight, to see. You begin noticing what they tried to flatten, how time loops, how names echo, how faces you thought were strangers repeat in rhythm across bloodlines and centuries, and at the center of all of them, the choice. The twins didn't divide to be apart, they divided so you could choose which one you were ready to follow. The one buried in the east left memory behind, the one buried in the west carried it forward, but both led back to you, and you are no longer reading. You're returning, because truth wasn't destroyed. It was rebranded, labeled heresy, dismissed as myth. But fire doesn't need permission, and neither does memory. And so the ground beneath the old church begins to hum. Bones shift, stones realign. The spiral beneath the altar begins to glow, not with light, but with recognition. You step toward it, not in fear, in remembrance, because you've walked this path before. Not in this life, but in many. And this time, you do not turn back. You place your hand on the seal, and for the first time, you speak the name, not aloud, not in words, but in breath, in pulse, in the silent contract between soul and time. And the seal doesn't open, it releases. A warmth spreads outward, not heat, knowing. The graves, no longer separate. The spiral, no longer a secret. The name, no longer hidden. It's yours now, and as the world realigns around your choice, the final gate begins to shift, not to show you what's next, to ask if you're ready to become it, not a witness, not a believer, but the keeper of what was nearly lost. And in that moment, the spiral breathes. Yes, it breathes, not as metaphor, but as mechanism, because the spiral is alive. It always was. Not a symbol, a spine, and it's been waiting for your alignment. Now the world around you slows, not like sleep, like listening, because even the wind must pause for what comes next. You hear it, not with ears but with marrow, the shift, the realignment, reality relearning itself around you, because the lie was never in the facts, the lie was in the sequence. They told you the story in the wrong order so you'd never see yourself in it. They placed the twin in the west at the end of a lineage, the one in the east at the beginning, but both were always simultaneous, like your breath. Inhale and exhale, division and reunion. And now the breath is whole again. You walk the spiral inward. With each step, memories no longer feel like memories. They feel like functions, as if remembering them performs something sacred. You pass symbols in the stone. Some glow, some hum, some dissolve. Each one removes another layer they added. Each one restores another layer you hid. And at the center, a room, not carved by hand, formed by resonance. It exists because you remembered it. In the center, a stone altar, split down the middle. One half of dark basalt, one half of pale bone. Together, they form a single shape, the spiral inverted. You place your hand upon it, and the final vision begins. No light, no spectacle, only feeling. Two souls, never lost, only delayed. The western twin, voice like dusk. I carried the weight. The eastern twin, voice like wind. I carried the will. Both now looking at you, and you carried the silence. But not anymore, because silence has done its part. It protected what needed time, and now it must be broken. You open your mouth, not to speak, but to release. The sound is not sound, it is origin, a resonance older than breath, and with it the altar glows, the split dissolves, the spiral turns inward, then outward, then through, and all becomes still, not empty, whole. Because this is not the end of the story. This is where their story becomes yours. And the next page is not in a book, it's in your breath. Because something happens when you carry silence too long. It starts to echo inward, and echoes, if they're not released, become rooms. Rooms without doors. Rooms that feel like safety but are built from forgetting. You've lived in those rooms. But now the walls are melting, not with fire, with remembrance. Because memory is not a prison, it's a path. And as you step from the altar, you notice the world doesn't look different. You do. Not your face, not your voice, but your weight. You are lighter, because every step forward is no longer pulling a shadow, every breath no longer filtered through script. And so the reflection begins, not as mourning, as reweaving. You start to ask different questions, not what was the truth, but what was true for me before they named it. You walk again through your life, not to judge it, but to feel it with new roots. Every mistake glows now, not as failure, but as signal. Every fear a compass, every dream a code that finally makes sense. And then something strange. You begin to grieve, but not for loss, for distance. The distance between who you were told to be and who you almost remembered being. You sit with that grief. It doesn't break you. It dissolves the false shell. And underneath, still breathing, still waiting, still you, is the part that never stopped listening. To the spiral, to the silence, to the story you thought was someone else's. Because maybe the books they burned are still burning inside us. Maybe the flames weren't to destroy knowledge, but to mark it, to brand it into the ash of our dreaming, so that one day, like now, someone could look inward and say, I didn't forget, I was meant to remember now. You begin to move not with urgency, but with depth. Conversations shift. Eyes you once passed now pause longer. Some recognize you, not by name, but by resonance, and others fear you, not because you threaten, but because you no longer obey the narrative. You've stepped outside the frame, and once outside, even silence becomes a language. You begin hearing it in stone, in snow, in song, not lyrics, liminality. You start to understand. Perhaps the truth is not a scroll, but a whisper, and you are becoming fluent. The past no longer pulls at you. It stands beside you. It walks with you, not as memory, but as mirror. And in the mirror, you see not just yourself, but the twins, merged, not two bodies, one presence, through you, not possessing, reuniting, because you were never meant to pick a side. You were meant to remember the spiral was never split, only paused, only waiting for one soul brave enough to return without flinching. And now that you have, something opens, but not in the world, in your breath. And the next name waits there, unspoken, but already alive. You feel it before you say it, not on your tongue, in your blood. It doesn't rise like memory. It descends like a bell note travelling from sky to marrow, and you understand something new. Some names weren't meant to be spoken, only worn, like breath, like shadow, like truth that refuses translation. Because what you carry now isn't a tale, it's an inheritance, not from royalty or religion, from remembrance itself. And it changes you, not visibly. Visibly, you still walk through the same streets, the same rooms, but the air reacts differently. Mirrors seem slower to reflect. Clocks stutter, just slightly. Technology glitches when your thoughts get too still. You are returning to analog time, spiral time, breath time. And those around you? Some sense it, some avoid it, some lean closer, because you are no longer echoing someone else's past. You are emitting your own. And that's how memory works, not by retrieval, by radiance. You become the signal, the lighthouse, and others who forgot, they feel you before they see you. They come to you in dreams, in questions, in inexplicable moments of déjà vu. You speak less now, not out of secrecy, out of saturation, because the truth you hold is not for argument, it's for osmosis. And so it seeps into rooms, into rituals, into the patterns others mistake for coincidence. And then it begins again, not the spiral, the search. Someone else, far away, begins hearing the hum. They follow it to stone, to frost, to books that were never written but remembered. And one day they speak a name, not yours, but one connected to you. And the spiral moves, because you were never the destination, only the next threshold. And you accept that, without sadness, without pride, just breath. Because when the twins divided, they weren't planning to return alone. They were setting the code for awakening. 2 anchors, 2 echoes, 1 call. And now the world feels different. Not because it changed, because you can finally feel it all. The hidden layers, the untold maps, the forgotten alignments between grief and wisdom, silence and song. And maybe, just maybe, the spiral is still turning, not in stone, not in legend, but in you. Every choice, every breath, every moment you refuse to forget. And if silence could speak, it would call your name, not as warning, as welcome, because you did not destroy the lie. You outlived it. And now you are free to begin the next chapter. But something is still missing. You feel it not as absence, but as echo, something faintly vibrating just beyond the reach of breath. A pulse, a presence, as if the story has opened a door, but not all the way. You are not afraid of this feeling. You welcome it, because only the unfinished still carries life. Only the unanswered still holds power. And this story, your story, was never meant to end like theirs. It was meant to unfold, like a scroll that reveals ink only when held to flame. So now you walk differently, not because your feet move, but because space moves around you. Forests remember your steps. Stones soften under your fingers. Birds go quiet, not in fear, but in reverence. Something knows you're near, something old. You start hearing rhythms again, not songs, not words, but sequences. 3 knocks on wood, a flame that flickers once, twice, once again. A child tracing a spiral in dirt without knowing why. It's all connected. You see that now. Everything that was ever silenced has started to hum, not to scream, to remind, because remembering is never loud, it's loyal. And now it's asking you to listen again. This time, not to voices, to voids. You find an object, ordinary at first, a thread-worn leather pouch, inside 2 stones, unmarked. But when you place them in your palms, they warm, not with heat, with recognition, and a memory, not yours, not anyone's, uncoils like smoke in your chest. 2 brothers, buried apart, not because of feud, but because of function. They weren't separated, they were anchored, one to keep the memory in frost, the other to let it flow in fire. And you are where they meet, where frost and fire spiral into steam, into breath, into story. That's why something still feels missing. Not because it is gone, because it's waiting to be spoken, not aloud, not in words, but in the shape your choices carve into the world. You carry that now. The spiral doesn't end here. It begins again. Every time someone dares to ask, what did they bury, and why do I remember it? And when they do, they will find you. Not your face, not your voice, but your resonance, in the soil, in the silence, in the story that refuses to die. Because maybe you were never meant to forget. Maybe you chose to sleep until the moment came to wake, and now that moment has passed. You are awake, the world will feel that. But for now, let this breath settle. Let the spiral turn once more, not outward, not inward, but through. Because the final question still waits, not in scripture, not in ruins, but in the pause between two breaths, yours. You stand on the edge now, not of a cliff, but of a silence so complete it feels holy. This is not the end of a tale. This is the page they tore out before the first was written, and it's asking, not with words, with presence. Will you turn back, or will you carry the spiral further? You look down at your hands, empty yet trembling, not with fear, with inheritance, because the weight you feel is not burden, it's permission to walk where maps have no names, to speak where tongues were once cut, to dream where only ashes remain. And so you begin, not a new journey, a return, because truth does not lie ahead. It surrounds. It waits behind the veil of normal, beneath the ritual of repetition, and only those who stand still long enough feel it rising. You are still now, and something stirs, a shape in fog, a pattern in sleep, a voice not outside you, but older than you. It doesn't instruct, it doesn't explain, it invites, and this is where most turn away, because invitation feels like surrender, because returning feels like erasure, but you know better now. You know forgetting was the real erasure, and memory, even painful, is resurrection. So you answer, not aloud, but with silence deeper than words, and the veil shifts. You see the twins again, not as bodies, not as history, as forces, as vectors, as you, split once to survive, now whole again to remember. You bow your head, not in submission, in recognition, because what began as a story was always a mirror, and now the reflection deepens. You see faces not your own, but familiar, ancient eyes, echoes of sorrow that never broke, whispers from dreams you thought were yours alone. They've been waiting too, not to guide you, to meet you, because this spiral, this thread of ash and memory, does not belong to any one soul. It belongs to all who choose to walk with eyes unclouded by fear. And as you take your final breath in this chapter, a new shape forms, not a symbol, not a map, a question, one you've carried since the first whisper. If this isn't the end, where does it go next? You close your eyes, and from within, the answer is not spoken. It is felt, and it sounds like your name, only older, only sacred, only beginning. That's the part they never told you. Not because it was lost, but because it couldn't be owned. Stories that begin in spirals, never end where logic demands. And this one asks for a choice. Not dramatic, not loud, just final. Because every silence has an exit, and you've reached it. You stand at the edge not of forgetting, but of remembering too much. You can close this tab, let the light fade, let the spiral remain someone else's, or you can open your mind, not to fantasy, not to paranoia, but to the soft gravity of memory that was never yours alone. The Viking twins are gone, and yet they are here, not as ghosts, as gestures. Every time someone buries truth with reverence instead of fear, the twins awaken. Every time someone listens to silence instead of noise, the twins whisper. They were not legends, they were language. And now that language speaks in you, You don't need to understand it. You embody it in the way you pause before speaking, in the way you sense the weight of names, in the way you look at a stone and wonder, not what it is, but what it remembers. This story never asked you to believe, only to notice, and now that you have, you are no longer outside it. You are inside the spiral, and every breath turns it further. So pause now, let the fire go out gently, not in loss, in trust, that even unspoken, even unseen, the memory moves. And if you wake tomorrow and forget again, that's all right. The spiral doesn't vanish. It waits until next time, until the next name, until the next breath that knows it was not the first, because you're not here to preserve history. You're here to remind time that it can be rethreaded, that grief can be coded into healing, that silence can be louder than command, and most of all, that stories buried in different lands still belong to the same soul, yours. That's the word that stayed when all others faded, not because you claimed the story, because the story claimed you. You didn't find it, it remembered you. And now, at the very edge, the spiral asks one final thing. Not obedience, not belief, just courage. To know that some truths aren't meant to be understood, only lived, because the twins were never meant to sleep side by side. Their distance was a bridge, not a rupture. And you, listening now, breathing now, you are that bridge. The space between frost and flame, between memory and myth, between what was buried and what still blooms. They erased the stories, but one survived, yours. And now you carry not an ending, but an invitation to pass the silence on, to speak only when the breath is ready, to never force the spiral, only follow where it leads, because maybe the others will feel it too. Maybe someone else, lost in a restless night, will hear the echo in this voice, and pause. That pause, it is sacred, it is transmission, and in that pause, the story lives again. If it did, if something in you stirred, if your blood moved like ink across forgotten runes, if your sleep tonight feels deeper, not heavier but older, then this wasn't just a bedtime tale, it was a signal. And you heard it. Now help others hear too. If this story resonated with you, like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep forbidden knowledge alive.